Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. It is December 10th, 2017. Do you know what your dollar is worth? Do you know why? Money manager Peter Schiff called the financial collapse in 2008. He saw it coming. Today, he sees another crisis looming. This time, he says, it's our debt. He said, quote, "I think the problem we're going to be confronted with is going to be much worse than a financial crisis. It's going to be a dollar crisis. It's going to be a sovereign debt crisis where the bonds people are worried about are not some subprime mortgages, but actually the U.S. Treasury bonds. This means the only thing worse than owning a dollar is going to be owning the promise of being paid in dollars in the future." Have you listened to the news? Have you heard what some of these people are saying about this thing? Remember just last week there was this, or a week or so ago, there was just this big push about the bitcoins and how we need to get rid of the dollar and go to that. Before that, there was discussion about China and Russia getting together anyway and doing away with the dollar as a global economy and so forth. This stuff swirls around all the time. He admits we don't have the courage to default and to admit to our creditors that we don't have the money and therefore we cannot repay. He says, "I think we will create all the money we need so we can pretend to repay. But what we will end up doing is wiping out the debt with inflation." Does that sound familiar? If you're involved with money or know anything about economics at all, you'll say, yeah, that sounds familiar. Why? Because that's what we've always done. After the Second World War, the United States economy became the dominant economy. Everybody needed a dollar because our dollar was strong. If our dollar is no longer strong, they'll go someplace else. Well, what would make the dollar not strong? We wouldn't be able to pay our debts. We would be broke. We didn't have enough money. You couldn't trust us. So what do we do about that? We devalue our dollar. We just print more of them. It's what we've always done. Maybe this time, he says, it will be a singularly significant change. But it is what we have done since 1932. In 1932, an ounce of gold was worth $20.67. You could take your dollar to the government, theoretically, and trade it in for an ounce of gold. But then the Great Depression hit. It was 1931 and the traditional system was strained to the limit. In Great Britain, people were exchanging their currency for gold at an alarming rate. The Bank of England was running out of gold. In America, the same thing was happening. People were taking their money out of the bank and in some cases investing in gold or insisting that the bank give them gold and not those paper dollars. President Roosevelt then took the advice of an agricultural economist who had helped him with some trees on his estate. His name was George Warren, and he suggested leaving the gold standard. What he advised was pegging the dollar at an artificial value. Initially, that would be 50 cents on a dollar, half. When Roosevelt told his advisors, they almost literally exploded. Dean Acheson, who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, resigned. Others said it would be the end of Western civilization. 1938. Was it the end? No, we're still here. In fact, it saved the economies of many Western nations. Most economists credit this one move to be the reason we were able to climb out of the Great Depression. Some would argue that the depression was artificially induced. Not going there. The government now had a new tool with which to manage the economy. Just adjust the amount of money in circulation, adjust the interest rates, and the crisis is averted. The imminent crisis, that is. Because the downside to this entire system is something called debt. You've heard about it? Prior to 1930, America was not piling up debt. In fact, we had a surplus of $7.75 billion. I got that from a website called federalbudget.insidegov.com. And this was up from 1929, where it was $7.41. In 1931, our debt was $5.38 billion. In 1932, it was $36 billion. The war would push the debt to $568 billion by the end of 1943. But we recovered after the war with a building boom. Things took off. People needed goods and services. They needed houses. Can you say Levittown? In 1964, Lyndon Johnson became president, and if you look at the charts, the debt line started to increase. And it continued through the Nixon and Carter presidencies. Nixon was the one who took us off the gold standard completely in 1971. And it wasn't long before home mortgage interest rates were soaring at 12 to 18%. That was in the 1980s, early 1980s. And gas prices exploded. Cars that were $6,000 and $8,000 suddenly cost $18,000 to $24,000. The budget began to recover under Ronald Reagan, sagged a little bit under George W. Bush, and began to really recover under Clinton, moving us as a nation out of the red into a $290 billion surplus by the year 2000. Clinton and the Democrats take credit for this, but economists point to Reagan economics in the early 80s that set all this in motion. It didn't kick in until after he was out of office. From here it began to move back down. 9/11 occurred, and then there was a continuing war with Islam, radical Islam. The Obama years, if you look at the charts, the Obama years was the worst peacetime economy in the history of this country. Nothing has been any worse than that. He racked up $1.41 trillion in debt, ending his administration with $552 billion deficit. Today, our total budget debt is climbing past $20.6 trillion. And all the debt indicators are up. Meaning, our dollar isn't worth $1. You knew that. It costs us $100 to purchase $10.17 worth of goods. That was in 1950. No, I take that back. It cost us $100 to purchase $10 worth of goods on the 1950 basis. Over the next 50 years, the inflation of this dollar brought that disparity to $92 for every $100 of goods. But the cost has been significantly rising ever since. Goods and services that cost next to nothing 50 years ago are astronomical today. And now the value of a dollar is simply measured against other currencies, which is all a floating value system susceptible to all sorts of event situations, many of which are out of our control. I'm not an economist, and some of these specifics may be off somewhat. However, the reality remains our money is largely worthless in terms of real value. Because, well, simply because men are greedy. Greedy for power, greedy for wealth. Men are not rooted in objective morality, nor do they want to be. And this moral vacuum is reflected in every area of life, not just in our currency, but in the concept of truth. What is truth? What is true? What is false? We don't know. And all of the definers are changing. What about our moral standards? They're not what they were in the 1950s. What about our laws? We have multiplied the laws like you wouldn't believe. I want $1 for every law we've created just in the last 50 years. But even those laws are not chiseled in stone. Courts are changing it all the time, based on opinion, emotion, factors nobody could have anticipated. Rules don't mean anything anymore. Promises don't mean anything anymore. Values are not important anymore, and they don't have the same meaning. We're moving toward a day when anything will be believed as right and good if enough people say it is. Oh, we're already there. I would suggest to you that it began when our leaders decided that the rules didn't matter anymore. And that had to do with the dollar. And it hasn't stopped yet.